Employers and managers who had to fire their best employee, what happened? Had a guy who would work his ass off daily inputting data into spreadsheets, would come in, put in solid hours of actual work, not goofing off. He would literally get 4 times as much stuff done a week as anyone else in the office. After 3 weeks straight of this, other people start to take notice and occasionally ask him to help them out when they are behind, and he obliges. This gets worse and worse, and eventually people are basically just walking all over him while they spend all day Facebooking and whatnot, because he won't say no if they ask him to help with their work. The dude just keeps trucking through though. About 4 months into working there, it's gotten to the point where you can hear the extra Y girls talking about leaving early and not getting in trouble because he will just do all the work for us if we ask anyway. Well, the guy goes into the boss's office, and I work right next to it so I can hear more or less the entire conversation. I am paraphrasing, but it went something like this. I would like a raise. I am doing way too much work for how much I am getting paid. Everyone else who works here is so damn lazy. I even have people making jokes about how I will do their work for them, and they will get paid for it. Well, name. I can sympathize with you, but you have to understand, I can't just give you a raise. If I give you a raise, I would have to explain to everyone why you got a raise and they didn't. You could tell them it's because I'm doing half of their work for them while they look at stupid memes. I'm sorry, name. It just wouldn't work out well. Well then, is there any positions available above mine that I could apply for a promotion to? I don't think we can really look into a promotion this early into you working here. We would need time to properly evaluate your work ethic. Seriously, you seriously just said that to me. I'm not going to break my back doing an entire office's work for a company that doesn't give 2 craps about me. You and this entire office can go duck themselves. He walks out of the office fuming mad and yells, "Hey everyone, boss, just denied my raise, so no more leaving work early for any of you lazy heads, because I damn quit." It was like a scene from Office Space, only in real life. Story 2. We hire a lot of people in recovery who are a part of the substances court program, under the condition that they will be terminated if they go back to jail for substances or alcohol charges. This coworker was our hardest worker and always picked up shifts and got tons of compliments. So it really sucked when she relapsed and failed her P-test with substances court. She got sent to jail for a week, and we had to fire her. I still kept in touch with her, and when I found out she was pregnant, I convinced my boss to hire her back. One last chance. I'm so happy I wasn't wrong because she's about to celebrate her 4th year of sobriety, and she's now management. Story 3. Had a great waiter. Robert, idiot, could run circles around the entire staff. He knew the kitchen as well, could jump in at prep and assist if we got backed up and still tend to his tables. Git put a $3 bottle of white Zinfandel in his backpack, right in front of a security camera, and while the owner was sitting at the bar eating. He was a student and working part-time. He had to be bringing in $50 in cash a week. Story 4. Obligatory, not me, but co-worker. I joined the company a few months prior, was still getting to know the various details of my job, and this guy was the star of the company. I spent as much time working with him as I could honestly. I mean, he was the damn star. He was a solid programmer, great project manager, awesome account and customer management skills, and he had a knack for thinking outside the box on creative solutions. He loved working there, had rejected offers from Google, Facebook, and Pinterest that I know of, and then he ducked the director's daughter. Well, story 5. He was one of my best weekend workers. Dependable, always on time, really good at his job. I got a call from my management on a July 4th saying, "We're going to need to find a replacement for name." I say, "Why did he find a better job?" My management said, "No, he was arrested for murder last night." So let's just say I didn't have the chance to fire him. I was dumbfounded when I got that call. So the story behind it is, a friend of the victim was worried when the victim wasn't answering calls, texts. She got in touch with the landlord of the facility expressing her concerns. They enter the apartment and find her face down in the bathroom with her wrists duct taped and duct tape around her mouth and nose. She was already passed by the time they got to her. The place had been rummaged through. Well, my employee lived right above her, and just by asking him simple questions about it, the police became suspicious of him, obtained a search warrant for his apartment. They found some of her clothing along with a missing money jar of hers as well as duct tape. He was arrested that night in front of a camera crew, in his work uniform of all things. Now he is in jail. The shame is he hit a woman who had terminal cancer. It never came out what his motive was behind it. Probably the money jar they found in his apartment. Story 6. Not me, but I was working in retail, and one of the customer service guys was being groomed for management. He'd been there for a while, was trusted to count money, and with the safe combination, opened if managers couldn't, etc. He was a cool black guy. His race is important to the story, but a bit cocky and arrogant. My cousin also worked there, who was also cocky and arrogant. Anyway, my cousin put in his 2 weeks, but wasn't being a bad employee. My cousin didn't like the soon-to-be manager because they were pretty similar in a lot ways, and they clashed because of it. On my cousin's last week, unprovoked, he approaches the guy and says, "You look like a big black sex toy." The guy walks up to my cousin, puts his finger to his head and says, "Do you have a problem with me?" It ended there with my cousin walking away, then reporting he was threatened. Because a finger made contact, the guy was fired. My cousin was a banana and didn't regret it and laughed about it with my other friends, who were also bananas. Story 7. Obligatory. Happened to a coworker working at a bank. My branch had the biggest superstar in the state, always crushing sales numbers. He generated more revenue than the rest of the branch combined. He set up a really big business account presentation, but his mother died literally on the day he was supposed to give the talk. Branch manager stepped in, held the presentation. The guy had built everything up. It was essentially a done deal. Branch manager just had to get a signature on the paperwork, obviously feeling bad for him, thinking he deserved the credit. They booked the deal under his name the next day. Technically, to get credit for a deal, you have to be there at signing. Both were fired within a week for sales manipulation. Story 8. Work in retail. One of the staff from checkouts was amazing and would come up and help in our cafe constantly. She was fast, friendly with customers, and we would get so many compliments, and we asked if we could have her up here permanently. She stole a pen. Security had her on camera, fired immediately. Pen was a fancy pen, packaged on shelf to be sold. She was right under the security camera stealing it. Security saw, told higher management, and I don't really think stealing, regardless what of, can just be ignored. I believe they probably did it to scare employees like, this is what happens if you steal. Story 9. He was our fastest forklift operator. Guy could get a truck loaded in 15 minutes. But he started developing a crafty attitude and we just couldn't work with him. The new operators we have take 45 minutes to get a truck loaded and they're legitimately a little dumb and have a hard time reading. Story 10. Scott was my riding buddy. We rode together everywhere on our motorcycles. I managed a small restaurant of a small chain. Only 2 shops, but it was growing. When a night manager position opened, I gave it to him. He worked hard and was enthusiastic. A couple years passed, now 5 locations. I was general manager and Scott managed the original location. We still rode everywhere, swapped girlfriends, played pool. Life was good. Scott began to miss rides we had planned because he was working. He really was a hard worker. Tireless energy. I soon noticed he was working so hard because he was understaffed. His employee turnover rate was high. I initially thought it was because of the young employees that typically applied at that location, but there was more to it. I started spending more time around him and noticed he was, when he thought I wasn't looking, a tyrant boss to the kids that worked there. Kids left and he covered it up by working more himself. Overworked, he became exhausted and an even worse boss. I gave him some time off, sent in experienced employees, worked with him on training and communication. I thought he was absorbing it, but I got reports back that he was worse than ever. I sat and talked with him. A serious job-threatening talk. He argued, said it was under control. I took his keys and handed him a box of his belongings. This is long ago, early 80s. As the recession wound down, I was able to find a better gig more suited to my skills and education. I heard from him a couple times, usually looking for something, a fake recent reference, cosign for a loan, etc. I don't do that for anybody. Last year, I got a sad call from him saying he wished we had stayed in touch. We both still rode. Actually, he didn't still ride. He was calling and he had cancer. I have always felt that it was my hiring him to a position he wasn't really ready for. That started him down the road from being an enthusiastic, bright-eyed kid full of hope and integrity to the sad bill collector he became. Story 11. I wasn't the manager, but we had a supervisor who was a rising star in the company, turned a struggling operation into one that was running well under budget and was generally easy to work with. We also had a mechanic who was a lazy sack of crap and nobody could ever find him. So one day, the operations manager was looking at the security footage, trying to figure out what the mechanic was doing so day, and caught him selling pills out of his truck in the parking lot. So he called the police. When the police showed up, the mechanic was in his truck, in the middle of selling substances to the supervisor. They were both fired. The operation went from under budget to being $50,000 to $100,000 over for the next few months. Story 12. Top manager for retail job I worked at lost her keys to the store that also had the keys to all the registers on the key ring. The registers started going short or would be empty aside from the change and dollar bills in the drawer. This went on for months. Corporate found out after installing a new set of security cameras overnight without her knowledge. She enlisted a group of sales associates to do most of the dirty work, but they found out she was the ringleader when they found out all the sales associates would bring her the stolen money, and she would dole it out after taking her cut. Story 13. Best guy, could do anything, a key player in the organization, making over $100,000 per year. Stole a $20 silver coin from a client's site. I wouldn't have believed them if they didn't have a clear video of the event. I watched it a dozen times. Suck. Story 14. My dad had a guy working for him who was great, could work long hours, not complaining about being on call, etc. Well, he got caught damn a nurse in his office. He got divorced and had a nervous breakdown and started threatening to hit everyone, so they had to fire him and have him banned from the premises. Oh, and after that we caught him hiding in the woods behind our house. Crazy guy. Oh, and he sued us for wrongful termination. Really dedicated guy. These guys were doctors who worked in the emergency department. He did get a settlement, and the nurse sued him and the hospital for harassment and got a few cookies too. Funny thing is how common affairs are in hospitals. This idiot couldn't handle it. Story 15. Worked in a restaurant at hotel chain. Management regularly found meaningless reasons to suspend various employees or cut hours. This one guy had been there almost 13 years. Clients loved him. Staff appreciated his presence, and he often came to the rescue of anyone requiring help. Everyone could depend on him, and he supported everyone. He had, like everyone in a restaurant, bumped heads with management now and again, like everyone. On one particular season, they decided they were going to groom him in the eventuality to take on more responsibility. His position would eliminate his right to tips, but it came with insurance, a retirement plan, and steady pay. He had kids, was in his mid-40 AOS. It all made sense why someone would take that job. He would, however, no longer be in the union. Fast forward to the day after his training is complete. The guy comes in with his management uniform and all. Some waiter calls in sick, and instead of him calling in another employee, he decides he was going to handle a few tables and the management responsibilities. At the end of the shift, the hotel manager summons the guy into his office, like the boss of his boss. They fired him straight away. He was escorted out of the building, and our boss said there was strict rules and management working tables harmed the hotel's image. He had maybe taken 2 tables and split the rest amongst the rest of the staff. Everyone basically agreed. They promoted him just to get him out of the union to be able to fire him. A number of employees left shortly after for other various reasons. It was a sort of shaking up the coup, and anyone who wouldn't fall in line would be shown the door. Today, that restaurant no longer exists. They closed down maybe 2 years later, rebranded the restaurant from American Steakhouse to Italian, French dining. New cooks, new waiters, new management. It was just sort of the catalyst or the first domino. Story 16. Managed a grocery store in the Midwest in the early 2008s. Had a great night stock guy, we'll call Juan, because that was his name. I got to know him a little bit since I'd occasionally have to stay and help the night crew stock since they were frequently understaffed. Juan was from Mexico, lived in a tiny apartment with his extended family, parents, siblings, an aunt and uncle, few cousins, and a baby nephew and niece. And he worked 2 jobs full-time. So for 8 hours a night, he'd throw stock for me, then go work at a restaurant as a cook for 8 hours afterward, then go home and nap for as long as possible before repeating all over again. I had nothing but respect for Juan. He was my second best worker on night stock, always showed up on time. His output was quick and steady, and the man was scrupulously honest. One night he wanted a soda, but we had already closed the store, registers. So I told him to just get one out of the display case and pay for it later. He kept the receipt for 3 weeks until I saw him again, and made sure he showed it to me because he wanted me to know he did. In fact, pay for it. Anyway, after a few months on night stock, he asks me if we have any positions available during our open hours because he missed being able to see his family and wanted a more normal schedule. We needed an extra person in the meat department, so I asked him if he would be interested in that. He said he would, so I had him sit down with the butcher for an interview. The butcher liked him, so we transferred Juan to the meat department. He did very well there, and the hours allowed him some more freedom. So it seemed like a great arrangement. Here's where it goes bad. This was about a year after the 11th of September, so the new Homeland Security and Patriot Act laws were being enacted fast and furious. One side effect of this was background checks and the like were being conducted by everyone, so there was a backlog of requests. I get a notice from SSA that Juan's SS hash wasn't valid. No big deal. Someone probably put a number in wrong somewhere. I call our HR and read the number he put on his application. No errors. I go and find Juan and double check it. As I thought, one number was off. I send it back to her. A week later, I get a call from the HR director. She conferences in the regional app guy. Apparently, Juan is not a citizen of our country. We need to terminate him immediately. I call Juan up to the office and let him know he's being let go. He's upset, but nods his head and leaves. He comes in a week later to pick up his last check, but there's no check for him. I call HR and find out that since he's not a legal citizen, we're withholding his pay until we hear back from INS. I have to tell him this as well. I don't know what happened to him after that. We did eventually pay him for his last week of work, but we ended up not paying out any of his vacation time, of which he had a fair amount, because of reasons I'm not very clear on. Story 17. I managed a coffee shop, Fakery. My best employee was this kid named Alexis. He was sharp and was quick to pick up on all the skills required to work in our fast-paced environment. But he was also someone who would stay out really late at night partying, and it would affect his attendance. One night in particular, he calls me up and tells me he's stuck in Baltimore and won't be able to make it in for his shift the following morning. He called me at 7 p.m. The last marked commuter train leaves at 9:30 or so, and there's a free circulator that runs throughout the city. I used to visit Baltimore pretty regularly at the time because there was a girl I was seeing from up there. Anyways, I only had one day off a week and was working 14-hour days. It was the last straw in a series of no-call, no-show situations where he had left me hanging for our busiest days. I called his phone that same night and told him that if he didn't show up for his shift on time the following morning, he was fired. He didn't show up, and I never saw him again. This was a few years ago, but I sometimes wonder what happened to him. He was a really sharp kid, but he did way too many substances and wasn't as clever as he thought he was, so would often get into trouble with police. Story 18 is to process expense reports from the sales department. I noticed one month that the top salesman had claimed a plane ticket expense twice, once when he booked it, and then again when he took the flight months later. I reviewed his past expenses and noticed he was doing this regularly. When he booked the flight originally, he would claim the full amount of the ticket. Then when he used the flight, he would claim each leg of the trip as a separate daily expense so that the receipt amounts wouldn't match, so as to avoid detection. This is how I figured out he was doing it intentionally. I showed the evidence to the CFO and he was gone the next week. I only went back 3 years, but he stole about $10,000 over those 3 years. Story 19. Not me, but a story from when I worked at Disneyland a long time ago in attractions. Rides. The area manager loved this one particular cast member, employee. Like, this was the son he never had. This CM was promoted to lead on one of the roller coasters fairly quickly in his regime. One night, he was the lead on the closing crew, and the crew decided to ride after hours. Idiots that they are. They went without the lap bars down, and on one turn, the ride is visible from the walkway. Even though the park was closed to guests, security was still in the park, and a security guard saw the train go by with the CMS standing up through the turn. Security gets a hold of Theme Park 1, the manager in charge of the park for the night, who calls Attractions 1 to find out what's going on. Not surprisingly, every CM who was on the closing crew that night was fired. Unfortunately, so was the prodigal son, because he was the one who dispatched the train without the lap bars down. Story 20. Best Buy manager had a guy in Geek Squad who was a great salesperson, probably top 10 in the district. He had an incident during a data transfer where he accidentally transferred another client's information to the external drive. The customer flipped out, and unfortunately, due to company policy, we had to let him go. Fortunately, he knew it was going to happen, but it was just a matter of time. Story 21. As the employee, with a manager who clearly didn't want to fire me, it was because I was not going to join the owner's Scientology activities. At the firing interview, the owner's stooge, fellow Scientologist and son-in-law, tried for 20 minutes to come up with reasons I was personally responsible for getting fired. Every reason he floated for my bad performance was shot down by my own direct manager, whom I'd invited into the meeting as I suspected what it was. And get that, they weren't going to invite him to a meeting where his own direct manager was being dismissed. It was all shady. Stuff like, Stooge CEO. Well, I see here that you have a lot of unfinished tasks. Direct manager. No, actually, everything on his to-do list is complete. Which, by the way, is why I thought I might be getting fired. I'd never had a clear to-do list. It went on like that, until Stooge ran out of ideas. After all that, the Stooge then said, well, the industry is on a downturn, so we're downsizing and laying you off. Upside, left in excellent financial condition, took a year off to complete a major goal in the martial art I'd been studying, went to Japan and achieved the goal, and now am being courted by terrific companies with interesting and challenging work, none of which are owned by Scientologists. See, when you complain that a tiny company gives the entirety of its operational and expansion budget, about $1 million at the time, to Scientology, and thus suddenly can't pay people, it appears that that is called an industry downturn. Story 22 was one of my best, was being reclassified into a salary position with raise. HR reviewed his original application and it said he had completed college. HR verbally asked him, no research done, and he said, no, I haven't. Wasn't required for role, NBD, writing it down, big deal. Gave him, almost to the point of coaching him to say it, every chance to say, whoops, made a mistake. He didn't. He cowboyed up and said, I lied on my application. I'm fully sure they would have let him go back to work with just a note in his file. Totally survivable. Super big, Fortune 10 company. No option. Fired him immediately for falsifying his application. HR person was in tears. I did my best to help him find his next job. Story 23. Amazing worker, but he just couldn't help fishing off the company peer. He had a relationship with a girl from accounting, but then they broke it off and she got bitter and started complaining about him daily claiming harassment. Unsafe workplace, yada yada. They let him go because of the threats of possible legal actions. Do not use your workplace to find girls. It doesn't work out well. Story 24. Semi-relevant, that happened to me. I wasn't the best employee, but I also wasn't the worst. I was young, 19 years old, working in a third-party car parts warehouse. What we'd do is sell those parts to auto body shops so they can fix body damage to cars. So we stocked everything on the outside of car, trucks, fenders, hoods, bumpers, lights, door handles, etc. My job was to unload the C-cans from Korea we'd receive 3 times a week, add them into the inventory, tag them with the barcodes for our stocking system, and put them on the shelves without interrupting the guys doing the picking, filling out orders for the various car shops we supplied. I was the crap at this. I'd empty a C-can in one day to allow for the next shipment to come in. The following day would be a rush to put everything away and start unloading the next shipment. My method created a mess in my area as we unloaded faster than we could put the parts away. But it was organized as duck, and I never failed to report missing stock or excess stock. All the while, the only time we had to pay fees for a container was the time someone unplugged the water pump for the loading bay, which flooded and subsequently froze. I was never told about the water pump. I didn't know where the plug was, otherwise I'd have made sure it was always plugged in. I still ate crap for it. What the heck ever. The owner loved how efficient we were. I'd been there 11 months when I was let go. At 12 months, I was entitled to a $1 pay raise, putting me at $1.50 above min wage. And instead of doing that, he put the guy he'd just hired, that I'd just trained in charge of unloading, and fired me to save $1.50 an hour. The owner was a gigantic damn a hole. I'd heard the rumors about him, but thought it was just typical, my boss is an a-hole shop talk. Nope, he was legit a cheap, lazy, gigantic asshat. Story 25. Not me, but coworker and I eventually, after he was fired, got promoted to what would have been his boss. But anyway, I worked overnight shifts for a server room at a university outside our supervisors. We were all student workers. This guy was pretty much the definition of overachieving kiss ass. Not really an idiot, just did whatever he could to look good to whoever he could. He was also very good at his job, was pretty much on a definite path to full-time employment, had he not ducked up supremely. One weekend, started Saturday morning, we had a cooling crisis, the AC units malfunctioned, server room got super hot, and we turned off all redundant equipment to keep the temperatures as low as we could until we got the AC back to full capacity. These servers were intended to stay off until we knew we were in the clear. Under no one's authority but his own, on Sunday night, he went into the room and started turning things back on. Ultimately, this caused no real problems, but he ended up being made an example of because this was a massive violation of policy. And if the cooling hadn't held up, he may have damaged equipment or even worse. My boss tried to find an out for him, but ultimately, they let him go because he pissed off both our server teams. Story 26. I work at a store where we have to ask for donations for the charity we support at every transaction. We're in competition with the other stores in the chain, and whichever store has the highest percentage of donations after 3 months get a bonus. Every employee, cashier or not, gets $100. Well, one of my assistant managers was awesome. Always had the highest percent of donations per transactions and highest dollar amount. She always did a great job in all other aspects of the job as well. Well, it turns out she was offering every customer her employee discount if they donated. So if someone spent $500 and she gave them 30% off, they wouldn't at all mind donating $20 per transaction. Well, it came back from corporate what she was doing, and we had to let her go. Story 27. This one grinds my gears even 10 years later. I was the overnight stocking manager for a home improvement retailer. Of my dozen or so employees, I had one who was a hard worker, reliable, and all-around awesome at the job, but a bit of an instigator. I also had one that was probably the worst worker person I've yet to come across. He was twice as stupid as he was lazy and smelled worse than a week-old diaper. I was trying to get rid of him from day one, but third shift doesn't always get the pick of the litter, so I was told to coach him up, whatever. So one night, after lunch, the crew is heading back to work. Hardworking instigator employee starts laying into stupid, lazy employee. Nothing too bad. More along the lines of, "Hey, am I going to have to come down there and help you finish your department again tonight?" kind of thing. Well, stupid, lazy employee doesn't cotton much to this line of inquiry and takes a swing at hardworking employee and connects. Hardworking employee, caught a bit off guard, swings back, whiffing. Another employee and I separate them before another punch is thrown and have them write up statements. I then send both employees home for the rest of the night. The morning comes, and I relay what happened to the GM and HR, explaining that it came out of nowhere. Hard-working employee acted reflexively and didn't actually hit anyone, doing my best to explain that he was basically assaulted on our property by the other employee. HR replied that there was a zero-tolerance policy for violence in the workplace, and that both employees were to be terminated. I damn hate HR. After appealing to both my GM and my DM, there was nothing I could do. I wrote a letter of recommendation for the hardworking employee and tried to help him catch on with another store. I don't know whatever happened to him. Trying to maintain relationships on third shift is damn impossible. Story 28. I didn't have to do the firing, but for whatever reason, my colleague had it in for this mid-level supervisor. She was a great trainer, did everything she was asked, took initiative, and then some. She was always worth well more than what she earned, and had an absolute passion for the work. We worked with kids with autism. After a few months of having some vendetta against her, my colleague wrote her up, literally for being away from her desk too often. Her uncle had recently been diagnosed with terminal brain cancer, and she was the only relative in town who could care for him. So the time she was away from her desk, she was stepping out to cry when she felt overwhelmed and didn't want people to see her cry. I found out after she was let go for this, that she had informed the supervisors of this when her uncle was diagnosed, and that she was feeling very emotional about it and may need to take days off, take more frequent breaks to gather herself again, and remain productive. Instead of showing compassion, my colleague used this as an opportunity to terminate her despite having no other red flags, feedback, or performance issues. There was simply a personality difference, and she didn't gossip with the other supervisors. And this was all done with our other colleagues' and supervisors' blessings. I don't work for this company after I found out about this. Story 29. Over 20 years of management experience. I've had to fire several great employees, and the main reason is because they upset the herd. They show up and most other employees are negatively affected by their presence. They complain too much, exceed boundaries, gossip, instigate crap, or whatever. They know they're good and act bulletproof. I'll usually pull them aside and give them a warning. You know they're good and they care, but if they don't quit upsetting the herd, they will soon be gone. Story 30. Out of high school, I got a job at Arby's, and there was a guy who pretty efficient at drive-thru and could run it by himself during lunch rush if he had to. Turns out during slow hours, he was skimming money by deleting orders after taking the money instead of completing the transaction. Managers estimated he did it for 3 or 6 months without getting caught and took upwards of $3,000. They never pressed charges, because he confessed. Almost forgot, he signed for the package and stole our team's Christmas bonus Walmart gift cards that were $25 each. Story 31. A few years back, working in returns, one girl always worked the morning shift because she knew no one else wanted to get up and be there by 7 a.m., always on time, never called in sick, etc. Quick description to set the scene. Our returns department didn't handle cash. We would give vouchers that could be cashed out or used as credit, or did returns right to cards. Each return required the password of a security personnel to ensure the items being returned were in fact being returned. Returns over 90 days old could only be returned as a gift certificate and required a manager's password. Well, one day I come in and ask where she's at. It was busy. We needed another body for returns. And my manager tells me she's been in the GM's office for 2 hours. Thought to myself, that's weird. Maybe they're promoting her? Nope. Turns out she was returning items off of 3-month-old receipts paid with cash, then walking down to the cashiers and having them put the money on a gift card. She watched the managers and the security people put in their passwords, and while no one was around in the mornings, she would find high-dollar items and return them this way. She got over $25,000 in gift cards over the course of 2 years. Corporate was monitoring her doing it for a year before they called the cops. Last I heard, she didn't do any jail time, but she had to return all of the merchandise she purchased that way and is never allowed to set foot in the store again. Story 32. Obligatory not the manager here, but as the employee being fired, here is my story. The company was being bought out, and we were going through lots of personnel changes in the management team. While this was going on, there were operational changes being made as well, like switching to frozen products, making sizes smaller, and raising prices. We finally had a good manager after a series of office dwellers. And 1 week after a visit from some new corporate bigwigs, he didn't have the schedule up like usual. Next day was my day off. I called a couple times and stopped by, still no schedule. Finally that night he called me and asked me to come in. I was confused but went over. He told me he had been arguing with corporate for 2 days, but they weren't giving an inch. They didn't like my mohawk. We were required to wear hats, so only people who saw me outside of work knew I had one, or my pierced tongue. This was mid-1990s. When my manager pointed out that none of that was addressed in the employee handbook or dress code, they said they had sent a secret shopper in, and I had coughed on that person as I was helping them. They described me accurately, except for the color of my shirt. I didn't even own a shirt that color. Whatever. 2 weeks later, my manager calls me and says he found my last check in the safe, and he was going to drop it by my house. I told him I already picked up my last check. I confirmed the amount with him. He said, I won't tell if you don't tell. So screw them. They paid me my last 2 weeks twice. I got a better job with benefits, and they didn't care about my mohawk. Story 33. A few months into my illustrious career within the payday loan industry, I was ranked as one of the top salesmen in the country. As a result of this, I was promoted to branch manager at a new location. They opened in the Arise end of nowhere. For some reason, daft reason, the area manager decided that he wanted that store open on Easter Sunday, as it was an opportunity to capitalize on the fact that every other payday loan store on the high street would be closed. I tried to tell him that those stores were closed for a reason High would be a ghost town, so he graciously told me to give my staff the day off and for me to man the store by myself. Cheers! So it's Easter Sunday and I'm 4 hours into opening, and not a single customer has come through the door. I'm bored out of my mind, so go to the back room of the store and rest my sleepy head. The front door has an alert when someone comes through it, so no big deal if I drift off, the alert will wake me up. I wake up an hour later and still, nobody has come into the store. I close up a few hours later, having only served 2 customers all day, and go home happy to have helped desperate people ease their financial constraints for only a reasonable 33% monthly interest. A few weeks later, the area manager comes to my store to perform an audit, and for some reason there's a discrepancy in the safe. Security tapes have to be reviewed, and alongside my I watch a tape of myself sleeping on the job, head resting comfortably on a roll of toilet paper. The tape was paused. A look was exchanged. "Fired?" I said. You know, it was the response. Story 34. This happened to me. I was told by the owner that I was the best salesperson. Then I texted a friend calling the owner a banana. He was very rude to my fiancé. General manager, who hated my guts, asked the friend what happened. She then went and whined to the owner. Erwin Ackerman said, "You're in a hole. You should fire her." So he did. Story 35. In grad school, I managed the coffee shop portion of the bookstore I worked at. I had just got the job, and my first order of business was to fire the entire staff in the coffee shop. I was devastated, as I'd become friends with most of those guys and gals. One of the employees, let's call him Jim, had been manipulating the sales numbers so he could pocket money from the register every night. It was kind of brilliant in the scummy, stealing from the company kind of way. However, management was convinced that the whole staff was in on it, but could never prove it other than Jim. They had hard evidence on Jim. Management called all the employees in one at a time, and I had to ask them questions. Some were big. "Did you see Jim doing this?" To small, "Have you ever not given a receipt to a customer?" Once management felt like they had an answer that they could fire that employee with, they jumped in the conversation and cut them loose right there. One girl, Heather, was a fantastic worker. Great with customers, always early, can always come in if we need her, and busts her ass. And she was fired too. I ended up hiring a great crew to replace them, but it felt crafty that first day. Story 36. Call center whose client was an insurance carrier. Rules are no cell phones on the call floor. We dealt with HIPAA and SNs, so was a total no-brainer, and not that hard a rule. Best rep on my team by far. Her call stats were awesome. She handled tough customers professionally, but that's the rule, and it's there for a reason. I look over one day and she's got a phone in her lap. I had to pull her from the call floor and issue a first and final warning. I let her know she's actually doing awesome, and while I get she's not stealing personal info, the rule is there, and we all follow it, myself included. 2 weeks later, I look down the row at something, and I see her with her phone in her lap again. Sigh, had to sit down, review that she had already received a first and final, and we had to part ways. She did burst into tears. I felt bad about it, and letting her go did nothing good for my team stats. But that is one rule that's got to stand. And it shouldn't be that hard to put your phone away and do your job. I do hope she found a good job after that. Truly, I do. Was a good kid. Story 37. I had an employee that was, by a very large margin, doing more work than everyone. Unfortunately, the amount of grief and anger he left in his wake was extraordinary. He was short with our customers, rude to his peers, but never quite enough to do anything concrete. In the end, I let him go because the damage to the team wasn't worth his additional output. So, best employee is maybe a misnomer, but there you go. Story 38. We had a field tech that was awesome, probably the best I've ever seen or heard of. He was knowledgeable, skilled, and personable. He was always early, worked great under stress when things went south, and often finished jobs early. If we had off-hour issues, he was always available, and it seemed like he was in his truck and ready to get going right away. Well, it turns out that he was always in his truck and ready to go. He had been living in his company truck for some time and just pulled off the side of the road each night at a utility pole, climbed up, stole some cable TV, and set up shop for the night. We found that out and had to let him go. Also, the substances. Story 39. Was working for a rental company, and the top seller got fired after getting into it with the regional GM. I was good friends with him, the seller, not the GM, and so the GM was out for my blood. I kept records and was careful, but sure enough, I got hauled into the manager's office with the GM there to fire me. I asked for cause, and he gave a bunch of flimsy crap about my work and how I didn't complete the sales reports properly. I responded calmly each time, showed him the paperwork. His response? I don't care that you have an answer for everything. You are friends with ex-employee, so you are fired. My manager, after the GM left, came to my desk and apologized. Gave me a great reference letter. So now their top 2 salespeople were gone, had a job that afternoon. Story 40. I know I wasn't the best employee, but I was doing what I was hired to do. This is about me, but I was hired to go over all expense reports and credit card charges for the company. This is one of those companies that has a ton of freebies, food every other day, parties, etc. They pride themselves on being a fun company. This company is growing big and is very lax on what they would allow money to be spent on. I was told to bring it in line, even if it meant changing the corporate handbook rules. The more I started to enforce the rules, the more my supervisor said that that's not how we have always done it. And we can't bug our employees with what they are expensing. After about 4 months of keeping expenses in line, my supervisor took me to HR and said that it was my last day. They had me work until 3 p.m. on a Monday and had the rest of my department in a meeting on the books for a week, so the department would be empty when I cleaned out my desk. I was glad. Everyone loved working there, but my department was hell. Good note, though. New executives came in and hated the way my supervisor was running things. She got fired 1 year after I did. Story 41. Not me, but I happened to someone I worked with. Very sweet lady, very nice, couple of young kids. Always a good, hard worker, and very motivated for a cashier. Well, we had a POS system that printed coupons for people based on what they bought after the transaction, to be given with the receipt. She would ask people if they wanted them, and if they said no, she would pocket the ones she knew she would use. Loss prevention made an example of her. I mean, I get why they didn't want people doing that, but it was a new system at the time. They didn't have rules against it. Story 42. Hardest working guy I knew. He would always come in early and pick up a shift if someone called in and willing to learn everything. Turns out he stops in on his day off to get a slice of pizza, but he's drunk as crap. Not a big deal in and of itself, but we were really busy and his work ethic took over. This guy, again drunk as duck, gets behind the counter in a wife beater and starts trying to help customers. We asked him politely to leave, but he just wanted to help so bad that he got really upset and caused a scene. Had to let him go for that. Super sad because it turns out he has a bad drinking problem. Story 43. This basically happened to me. Was working at Best Buy on track to become a supervisor. I had a couple good weeks where I had a couple customers talk to the GM about how great I was, which culminated in a weekend where 3 customers talked to him about me in the same day. A manager sat me down and told me how awesome it was and gave me a merit raise, which never happens outside of the company's yearly evaluation raise. About a week later, the word came down from corporate about a bunch of layoffs. And I got laid off because I was the least tenured in my department with 5 years of experience. I don't think I understood it as a young adult, but the rest of my department was people trying to support a family. And looking back on it, I respect the guy for protecting that other staff that really needed that job more than I did. But at the time, I was just flabbergasted. Story 44. 2 best salesmen were committing credit card fraud for months to drive up their numbers. I wasn't the manager, but I worked for a large electronics retailer in the mid-2000s, and there were a couple of guys there who were absolute rock stars, at least by sales numbers. Every month, these guys were somehow at the top of the list. I was a newbie, so I started to pay attention to them when I was out on the floor. I didn't see them doing anything special, nor did they seem to be helping more customers than other employees. I shrugged it off and forgot about it. I worked there for about a year before grad school, and then left for a corporate job. A few months after I left, I returned to the store and asked about the 2 guys. The manager got real quiet, and after some cajoling, she told me that those 2 guys had been convicted of credit card fraud. They had been duping customers' credit cards and then having their friends come in to buy stuff on those fake cards, thereby driving up their sales numbers and getting free merchandise in the process. Story 45. This kid was a 20-something, started on the call center, quickly became one of the top 1 precinct in the nation, promoted to supervisor within a year, took his team to 1, and his teams were way ahead of everyone else. My company would send the top 1 precinct of the company to Hawaii for an all-expenses-paid trip. He went, and 11 of his 15 team members went. This guy knew everything about customer service and how to de-escalate the angriest customer. Then we sent him to all of our centers to train others how to do what he does. Quickly, our company won J.D. Powers Awards for Best Customer Service. It was amazing. Then our company was bought by another company, and their first move was to cut payroll, bring us the top 10 precinct of the highest-paid people, and turn them loose. I brought him in my office and laid him off. The company gave him a 6-week severance. It was said to see him go. Then our company went to crap. So if you are a company that needs better customer service, don't fire your best customer service guy. Story 46. Dude, we know the trick of taking store merchandise out with the trash, then coming back later and picking it up. We're hip to that. We check for it. We check for it all the time. I like you and all, but it isn't going to work. Damn it. I didn't want to, but that's why I fired you. That's why you left the store in handcuffs, and that's why 2 days later I testified against you in court. Story 47. Not the store I work at, but a different store within the same company. So one morning, the assistant manager of this particular store is on an early shift and goes to open up the store. This person discovers the store in such a state that it would look like it was looted, even though there was no signs of a break-in. Watching the CCTV footage of the night before, the reason for this mess would be because the general manager of the store and 4 members of staff let themselves into the building. All ducked off their faces. They then proceeded to trash the place and end up having sex with each other on the shop floor. The 4 leave the manager passed on out the floor and leave the building. Then a couple hours later, the manager wakes up and proceeds to walk out the shop and locking the door behind. Story 48. At my company, we have lots of salespeople. And when I first joined the company for the first 5 months of working here, this guy would be top salesman here every month. His pitches were on point. He cared about his clients and was generally a nice guy that everyone liked. One day he didn't show up to work, but police showed up an hour after starting one day asking for him. Turns out he went to do a test drive at a dealership and never brought the car back. They caught him like 3 states away with the car. On top of that, he would post pictures on Facebook of living the life down in California right before he was caught and thrown in jail. After he had been in jail for a week, he was back to posting on Facebook. From jail, Story 49. She wasn't the best, but one of the best. University dining hall. About 100 employees, including student staff, temp staff from a local agency, and union staff. Had to get rid of her because she had a felony, credit card fraud. I was kind of shocked because she was so young, quiet, sweet, a team player. But I also knew she was a young single mom, likely from a poor background, and was probably desperate. But we work with some underage kids, so we had to let her go. Another top employee was also from the temp agency. She was such a team player and very efficient. It ended up that she was padding her hours on her timesheet. And us managers didn't catch it because we literally had about 100 other things to worry about than to scrutinize her reported hours. Lesson learned. Story 50. Okay, so this was Borders, just as it was starting to really go downhill. As an employee forever, we got coffee free. Suddenly, they were telling us we had to pay 35 cents a cup and pay for the milk in our coffee. An odd request? And no one really paid for their milk because how the heck do you calculate that kind of crap? We had this new guy in the cafe from China. He was a sweet, can be, worked hard, came in early and was doing such a great job. The head honchos came down to our store and asked everyone if they had paid for the milk in their coffee. Everyone said they had, except him. He's fired on the spot for not paying for the milk in his coffee. I think that was the moment we realized we were all on a sinking ship. Story 51. I managed a restaurant. We had a cook who could do the work of 5 people. He made great food and was an amazing multitasker. He was made a supervisor because he was great at his job. I was young and didn't realize that just because someone is great at their job doesn't mean they should supervise others. He went from kicking ass to yelling at people for not being as good as he was. That caused lower productivity, and I couldn't let that stand. I offered him his old job back with a moderate pay cut from his supervisory position, considerably more than he made as a cook before, and he declined, but also didn't want to quit. I had to fire him. I felt bad, but now he's doing really well in another industry, so I think it worked out. We still talk from time to time. Story 52. So not me, but related. Was doing some landscaping a while back for my landlord, and she mentioned how grateful she was because she had to let go of her last guy. She said she hated to do it because he was so good and worked so hard and would just go from sunup to sundown and not take any breaks and just work like an animal. Turns out he was tweaking balls on Met that whole time and eventually accidentally texted her asking if she had any crystal. Also found out I'm a really hard worker, but I don't hold a candle to an addict. Story 53. I'll join in. Obligatory happened to coworker. I work at a car dealership. When I first got hired, the 2 salesmen was crushing everyone else. Maintained a monthly average 20 units every month. I followed him around as much as I could learning from him. Fast forward a year and find out he's been sneaking across the street to the gas station and putting a 1/5 of whiskey into his soda every day. Eventually, he gets picked up for Dewey one day because his dealer plate wasn't showing on the car properly. Company paid for him to go to rehab to get cleaned, which is something I love about my employer. They'll do damn near anything to help out an employee. Dude gets out, stays clean for a few months, then right back to it. Needless to say, he went bye-bye. Story 54. He'd been at the company for 8 years before I became his manager. All of his reviews were 5-star. He was damn awesome. So I wanted to see what his deal was because it was odd to have the one standout person. I shadowed him for 5 days. He was 100% on the level with his work. He did it all correctly and quickly. Satisfied? I just let it be. 2 weeks later, he's arrested and fired. He'd hidden several cameras in the ladies' bathrooms. Story 55. Kinda sad, actually. He had to take another job to support himself and his family working nights. Problem was, he wasn't getting enough sleep. He was coming in late and missing shifts, losing his temper at work. I cut him all the slack I could, but it affecting the store, and thus me, significantly. I'm hoping he found something better. That place was all kinds of terrible. Story 56. As a more lighthearted one in here. I work at the YMCA and many people come through our staff. It's a nice enough minimum wage job, but not forever. a kid who was smarter than everyone else on staff. She was good at her job, just finished her degree, was working while studying, and her passions were in a different field. So I talked with her about moving on, and she admitted to being scared about finding someplace else. After a while, we fired her, and now she just got hired at her dream job a week later. Good luck, Steph. Story 57. Right before I joined the military, I was working at a Taco Bell. The store manager had been there for a long time, and her boss had her slated to move up the chain. Right next door to the store was one of those oil change places with some pretty shady, stupid employees. She got involved with one of the dumbest ones there, who in turn got her strung out on substances. She ended up coming in one night and opening the safe and took everything. She didn't even wait until the store was closed, just came and cleaned it out. Once she sobered up the next day and realized what she did, she sobbingly called her boss and turned herself in. I left for basic training and never heard what happened to her. Story 58. An engineer worked for me. He was a weird guy, but incredible server engineer. He kept crap smooth, would let me know if problems were about to happen, would come in on a second's notice. Someone found adult film on his computer. They reported it to me in HR. I fought for him. He went through the whole HR thing and had to take classes, but I saved his job. Then one day a night janitor caught him pleasure himself to adult film on his computer and reported it. I had to fire him. Story 59. I managed a restaurant for years. I had a line cook who worked for me who was the best cook that I had ever seen. He was fast, his food looked great, he was cool under pressure, and his line was always spotless. Only problem was his dependability. He had a wife who was chronically sick, and every time she got sick, he wouldn't show up for work or even call in. I finally had to tell him I understood why he couldn't come to work sometimes, but he had to at least call to let us know he wasn't coming. Less than a week later, he did it again, and I had to let him go. Story 60. I was managing a clothing store, and I had this very good employee, always on time and really good with customers. The only weird thing is that she was obsessed with the garbage, always volunteering to take them out. One day, I decided to look at the garbage she was throwing. I got in the bin, high heels and all, and got the bags that were full of brand new clothes. Who do I see coming in his car? Her boyfriend. Got back inside and fired her on the spot. After that, I bought see-through garbage bags. Story 61. We were working, and someone came in and said, "Hey, Fred, your house is on the news. It's on fire." Fred took off like a bat out and got to his house in time to see the cops and firefighters walking out with the pieces of his grow-op, all in company boxes, which was on the nightly news. Apparently, Fred had done some, poorly done, rewiring to his grow room that overheated and created a little smoke. His drip irrigation system was created from parts we had at work. Never seen him again, although I heard all the evidence against him was lost. So the criminal charges over that were dropped. Story 62. The dude was one of the smartest and hardworking people on my team. My ops manager comes up to me one morning saying she needs to speak with me. He drunkenly texted her the night before and asked if she wanted to come over to his place for sex. She politely declined, not knowing what to make of it. He then sent her another text asking if she was willing to sell him her used panties. I miss this guy. Story 63. I wasn't his employer or manager, but a colleague. The guy worked for 2 years in the company and pretty much 20 years in other companies beforehand, so had a very good experience, and had good results and was very well liked by his colleagues. Turned out he had lied on his CV about his degree. He actually never went to uni, but that was more than 20 years ago, and he was good at his job. They fired him for lying. He actually could have just corrected his CV. When you have worked for 20 years somewhere, your experience is more important than your degree. Story 64. We had one of our best people, sales, consulting position where performance matters, fired a couple months ago. It was never broadcast what happened, just that it was an HR issue with cause. It was definitely a move that hurt the business. What most people except for the prez and HR don't know is that he was warned several times to stop flirting with, hitting on, and occasionally touching his female co-workers. Don't try to get your junk wet in the workplace, especially in white-collar office environments. Story 65. Longtime factory manager copied an inventory sheet twice and added 20,000 to inventory numbers for 3+ months. To be fair, we use a 20+-year-old accounting system, so paper is still needed and the ultimate problem, but the board freaking out over missing inventory had to fall on someone. Story 66. Had a kid working for me, 22 at the time and seemingly the most genuine nice guy. He had epilepsy. One day he leaves work on foot. Before he gets out of the parking lot, he has a seizure. My general manager and I call 911, run out there and wait for an ambulance. Because it happened on work property, he had to take a substances test. He failed and was fired. Story 67. Embezzled $70,000 over the course of 2 years. It is easy to get away with when the one person in charge of making sure nobody is embezzling money is the person embezzling the money. He would have gotten away with it if he hadn't been getting increasingly bolder with how much he took. The way it is set up, it would be untraceable without some serious digging through a floor-to-ceiling archive of documents. Workers who got their bosses fired, how? Story 1. Management was giving an injured worker crap, not wanting to pay him, accusing him of gold bricking. Worker said, "Tell you what, do the right thing here or you will be sorry." Management said, "Take your best shot." Worker called the EPA and APCD, told them where to find the logs that showed discrepancies in toxic material storage and usage. Sheriff's deputies showed up and raided the offices. Field supervisors from 10 years ago that had retired got subpoenaed. It was epic. Cost the company massively in fines and remediation, all because you wanted to duck with one poor git. Story 2. Not my story, but my mother's. I watched on the sidelines as a teenager. My mother's job was basically a professional fundraiser. I really don't know what else to call it. People came to her for help raise money for nonprofits or other foundations that needed it. This was a long time ago, before social workers were more of a mandatory thing at high schools. My high school was very poor and did not have one. So my mother took it upon herself to set up a fundraiser to pay the salary of a social worker so my high school could have one. After raising all the money, she went to talk to the principal, who flat out refused to take any of it and said the position just wasn't necessary. My mother was pretty upset and just decided she would donate the money to supplies or something like that. I honestly have no idea what she did with it, but it did go to some sort of charity. After a few months, at a Christmas party, the superintendent of all the public schools in the area was at the same party, and he struck up a conversation with my mother. After some small talk, my mother said that it was such a shame that principal didn't take the money for the social worker's position. The superintendent was dumbstruck and then told her that he had ordered principal to find funding for that position. And when superintendent asked him about it, he replied with, "No one is interested in that, and we just couldn't get the money for it." Needless to say, he lost his position, and whenever we came back from the holiday break, the school was hiring for his position. Story 3. Worked register at a tour company. I also had a manager who damn hated me for some reason. She was probably the awful person I've ever met. Constantly yelled at us for not reason. Got on to me about answering questions a new hire had. When I was asked, not her. Wrote down I was 30 minutes late for a shift when I was 2 minutes late, etc. We had a sneaking suspicion that she was taking money from our tills, as she was always the one who counted down the till when someone got fired for stealing cash. I made it a habit to count down every bill when I gave it back to a customer because we would get pay docked if we were even dollar off. So if a customer had $23 in change, I'd count 20, 1, 2, 3 in front of them, so I knew I'd given back the right amount. We also had cameras pouring at the registers. Well, one day my GM pulls me aside and says $20 was missing from my till, and they were going to fire me. I straight up told my boss she could look at the cameras, because I counted out all my bills for customers. Lo and behold, Idiot was the one who counted down my till and got caught on tape pocketing the money. She was gone by my next shift. Damn you, Jennifer. I won. Story 4. Not fired, but transferred. Had a squad leader make us all stand out in the Missouri winter, soaking wet until someone volunteered for weekend duty. I told him I had previous cold weather injuries. Frostbite. He ignored it. The corporal saw my blue feet when I took off my boots and sent me to the aid station. The doctor lost his crap, and that squad leader was in another company the next day. It's not as justice bonering as getting an a-hole fired, but it's the Army that's not going to happen. Story 5. I got my boss disbarred. He was an attorney who was a serial sexual abuser of female clients, criminal defendants. He got away with it for over 20 years and preyed upon at least 12 different victims. The Office of Attorney Regulation censured him multiple times for other offenses, like being late to pay his annual bar fees. But even though they knew about at least 5 of the victims, they wouldn't disbar him. I discovered that the Office of Attorney Regulation decides whether to pursue an action against an attorney based on a cost-benefit analysis. I gathered as much documentation of everything as I could over a 6-month period. Story 6. Advanced through the company through hard work and dedication and slowly began to usurp the boss's duties and responsibilities. Eventually, the owner realized what a lazy schmuck the old boss was and laid him off. A week later, I got a new title and a 35% raise. Story 7. Mine is pretty pedestrian, but very satisfying. I was working in a garden center. I'd been there a long time and was woefully overqualified for the job I'd been doing, and was therefore very valuable in that position. Think ops manager skills at admin assistant position and pay. We lost our sales manager one year and corporate hired a new one. Let's call her Flora. She was a real piece of work. I don't know what her interview looked like, but in person, she was instantly and constantly rude and strident and mean and curt. And dismissive, and that attention-seeking brand of lazy where she threw her weight around without cause, talked crap about anyone not in the room, and collected 75% of the credit for 5% of the work. She had some knowledge, I guess, but it's way easier to teach a competent manager how to grow flowers than it is to teach a whole horticulturist how to be a human being. Anyway, for whatever reason, corporate loved her, so she stayed. What with one thing and another, I got another job. This process was slightly accelerated by Flora, but only a little. I'd been looking for some time, mostly waiting for the right opportunity. When I gave my 2 weeks' notice, I got an email the next day scheduling my exit interview with the head of HR. Now, my position didn't get exit interviews. Only managers, and sometimes department supervisors, did. And everyone at my store knew why I was leaving, so there was literally no reason for the store manager to pull strings to get me one. And he never said anything about it. But I knew. He set it up so I could tell the head of HR, a man I was very friendly with, that I was leaving because of Flora. And I did. I just laid into her. I said that Flora was the only reason I was leaving after almost 10 years with the company, during which time I wrote the company's health and safety program, trained almost every other person who did my job at other stores, made spreadsheets that got used company-wide, as well as setting audit records that still stand to this day, and all for a few pennies over minimum wage. I said I was going because she was the worst and I couldn't take it anymore. I found out later she was let go. I was thanked by most of my old workmates. My manager never said a word about it to me then or since. He was a real OG. Story 8. I used to work at a title company and witnessed our department manager forge mortgage documents on a fairly regular basis. So when she went to upper management to throw the entire department under the bus. For being behind on recording documents, I marched straight to HR to resign and let them know what she was doing. She was fired, and they called me and offered my job back before the week was out. Story 9. For a while, I was a project manager who got moved around from project to project as a fixer. I was moved to a project where the customer just could not be satisfied, no matter how many people, how much attention, how we bent over for them. Our program's director, who should have been our advocate, would not manage the customer, and instead just hammered his employees to do more. People on our team were being let go due to failure, or quitting outright due to burnout, and he was getting that he couldn't get good people. Because of my sort of special position as General Dog's body, I happened to have the ear of our vice president, and this project came up in casual conversation. I mentioned that it seemed funny, that if the director was doing his job, how so many employees that we knew by fact and reputation were good employees had failed. A week later, I heard that the director had been let go, and nothing of value was lost. Story 10. By doing so much, it started an investigation into what they were actually doing during their day. She was fired for sending hot through corporate email. But the only reason they were tracking her email was to understand what she was spending her time on. Turns out it was an affair. Story 11. I used to be a store manager at Sneaker, sporting goods store in the mall. One of my co-managers was ducking one of my employees in that back stockroom after the store closed on a regular basis. This was going on for several months, apparently. I found out when Said came to me, and she said that my co-manager promised her a raise that she never got. I asked her why he said that he would give her a raise. That is when she told me about the sex in the stockroom. I had to call the police in corporate about this. We arranged a sting with help of the girl, as she acted out for the police that to meet up with my co-manager after work. Basically, caught him with his pants down, to use the term. Story 12 was working maintenance at an ice rink. The rule for anyone who knows how an ice rink works is if the Zamboni doors open, you get the duck off the ice. Some idiots decided to ignore the fact that they were open and that I was standing in the doorway, and decided to rip off one last slap shot. The puck bounced off the glass and hit me in the head. I was okay, but reported it to my boss because we have to fill out an incident report for things like that. The boss asked, "Are you okay?" I said, "I feel okay." Then he responded with, "Well, we don't really have to report it then, do we?" I reminded him of the protocol, but it was clear he didn't want to do it. Since he wouldn't do it, I sent a descriptive email of the incident up to the administration because I felt there should be some sort of documentation, paper trail in case. The boss was fired by my next shift. Story 13. I was an intern at a tech company, and in a one-on-one mentorship meeting, my boss asked me what skill set I wanted to pursue in the future. I said that I wanted to do back-end work. This was a programming internship. He replied and said, "Girls aren't smart enough for that type of work. How about we put you on the path? You'll do better there." At the time, I was so stunned that I just repeated quietly that I wanted to do back-end work. The meeting awkwardly ended after that. I always thought that I would be courageous in the face of blatant sexism if it ever happened to me, but instead, I was silent because I was a 23-year-old who really needed that internship to turn into a real job. Fast forward a couple weeks, and I was out to lunch with a few coworkers who brought along a lady who'd worked at the company for years. She'd been out on contract for a while, so I hadn't met her yet. Everyone was talking about the boss and some of the stuff he had done or said to them, mostly just rude things. So I took a chance and mentioned what happened in that meeting. She said she'd take care of it. Within a few days, he was fired by the big boss. I went on my first contract doing back-end work about a month later, and I loved it. As I understand it, I was not the first person to have serious complaints about him, just the last person. Story 14. I had a job that required my supervisor to be doing evaluations of my cases and charts. She just hadn't in months. She and my director ordered me and my coworkers to do our own chart audits, fill out the forms, and they would sign off. I was so tired of not having adequate supervision. staff meetings weekly where she yelled at us, and invariably someone cried due to the stress and lack of support, and not having been paid enough to do everything I was doing in their job. I refused. I was told to do it or I would be fired. Nope, so I got fired. On the way out to my car, I called my former director, who had moved to another agency. She set up an interview for the next day, and I had a new job within 24 hours. She asked me what had happened at that interview. I spilled all the tea. Her sister-in-law was on the board of the previous agency, so she called her, and I told her everything too. Director was fired, and supervisor was reprimanded and put on close monitoring. She had killed any chance of promotion, and left shortly afterwards, I heard. I was just happy to have jumped ship from that toxic mess. I should have left months earlier. Story 15. Our manager spent her whole shift in the office watching us on camera, and if we so much as stopped to talk to each other, she'd come out and yell at us to get back to work. She was completely immature. One time I left my water bottle at the front counter, and my coworker had to stop her from purposefully throwing it away. She would make up rules on the spot if she didn't like something someone did. I could go on. She was a terrible, unfriendly, hypocritical, mean manager. Honestly, we all just went to the owners and told them everything and how it made us feel. They got HR involved and got her fired and found out she may have been stealing or giving away product. It was such a relief. If you work for a small business, just be honest with the owners if management isn't family. Story 16. It was my supervisor. It got to the point that I had decided to quit. I had my resignation letter in my purse, but decided to let his boss know why I was quitting. Supervisor would talk about all the people on our team constantly, but only behind their backs. I got so sick of telling him to cut it out. My husband and I happened to work at the same place, different departments, and my supervisor would make comments about group sex with him, what hotel we picked for our afternoon delight, crap like that. It was so bloody uncomfortable. Apart from this, he spent most of his supervising time outside smoking. Problem was, supervisor was one of the guys, and I was the only girl. Turns out his boss was disgusted, told his boss, who lost his mind. They started an investigation, which took 3 days. They interviewed staff. They corroborated what I said. They checked the security cameras. Saw he was spending most of his workday outside smoking, and was fired. When he was told, he guessed, wasn't hard, that I was the person who complained and tried to get to me to apologize that I took it the wrong way. The best feeling was my coworkers surrounding me as he was wailed out. That was a lovely ending to it all. Story 17. He was always slacking off. He'd go and do a 15-minute task and be gone 2 hours. He'd have to shoot off early for a doctor's appointment or a dentist appointment, always with no prior warning and whenever he was obviously bored. This was, mind you, within weeks of the new shop opening and all of us being hired. I was young and went along with it for a while. My colleague was in her 40 and vaguely knew him anyway, so was not standing for it. She reported him repeatedly to our area manager, who decided to come down to speak to him about it. I'm rung in the morning, told him to stay in the shop today, and send one of us out for anything that needed doing. He said he had something to do, but his boss said, "Nope, need you in the shop." Somehow, he didn't get the obvious message and went out anyway. The AM came down and he was gone. My manager wouldn't answer his phone all day. I was pissed. At the end of the day, when we were closing up, he walked past, posted his keys through the door, and I never saw him again. Didn't even attempt to argue his case. Story 18. I had a boss who refused to make accommodations for a disabled coworker, refused to keep other staff in line, and basically let the disabled worker fall behind and get picked on because she, the boss, felt like she was not required to do anything else. I work for a local government agency and reported it to our HR and upper management. After they did nothing, I contacted them again to let them know I would be filing a suit with the ACLY for ADA violations. My boss was gone in 2 weeks, and the rest of the staff had mandatory ADA trainings. Story 19. I used math to prove to Asterisk, their Asterisk superior, how severely my boss had underestimated turnover 3+ years in a row, costing a ton of money and labor issues. One day earlier, the boss had screamed at my team until his face went purple, making a huge spectacle in front of the entire floor. The gist was that we were colluding against the company by, a handful of us, electing not to renew our contracts. Came back with graphs and maths, baby. He was demoted and transferred out a couple weeks later. Pro tip, don't make a grumpy scapegoat out of someone who loves to make Excel graphs. Story 20. I had proven myself as a competent management-level employee. She, on the other hand, showed favoritism, broke rules, set schedules nobody could work, and all around didn't give a crap as assistant manager. When the manager left, she assumed she was a shoo-in. After all, she was the assistant manager. So why wouldn't she be promoted? We both got called into a meeting the district uppity up, told us both that I was going to be the new manager, and she lost her crap. I never saw her again, and quickly after all her relatives that worked there quit mysteriously. Story 21. I was working at a gas station. Now this gas station was a dump. Tiny place that was getting robbed, and occasionally a drive-by would shoot it up. But I was broke and needed the money. I worked my first 2 weeks there. Payday comes no pay sheet. Okay, fine. Sometimes because of how timeliness work out, it gets put on the next check. Next payday comes, still nothing. So I talk to the owner who tells me he has not been able to add me to the payroll and to check back with him tomorrow, and my pay sheet should be there. Next day rolls around, and so does the boss man, who tells me he still hasn't added me to the system, but offers to pay me under the table. Counts out a stack of bills. Now here is the thing. I had been keeping track of my hours, and he was trying to pay me less than half of what I had earned. So I tell him that he needs to put me into the system and pay me properly, and I ask him if the money he is offering has had the tax deducted and tracked. Boss is surprised that I actually want to pay my income taxes. I remind the boss that tax fraud is a thing, but he didn't care. I got a little heated and demanded he pay me properly or I would go to the labor board. Boss told me to go home and that the labor board won't do anything. So I did, and with a calm fury, I proceeded to unleash hell on that guy. I walk home, and while I do so, I call the labor board, who immediately email me the forms I need that basically said he either paid me what I was owed or he would be forced to pay me and face some steep fines. Great. But then I have a thought and I make another call, this time to the CRA, and I let the tax man know everything about him trying to pay me under the table, and they were very interested to know. A couple weeks pass, I finally get my pay sheet, and I learn from several friends who had all worked there that they received a call asking if he had ever paid them under the table or offered to, and assuring them they would not be in trouble if they had accepted. Well, of course, all of them had been honest and said he had indeed tried to. And that was the last I heard about it until one day, a few months down the road, I stopped in after noticing a friend of mine was working there. They told me the rest of what happened, as they had just been hired when it all went down. My call had started an investigation leading to tax fraud, evasion charges. But wait, there's more. Turns out it was discovered that those robberies that kept happening were staged to get insurance money. More fraud. Suffice to say, the owner was arrested. Story 22. My manager at a new job, let's call him Leo, offered to give me a ride home after a Friday night shift went overly long. Instead of turning into my street, he went to a bar about a mile in the opposite direction so we could get to know each other. I had one drink and asked to go home. Instead, he bought me a second drink. I asked to go home again, and he tried to assault me. The details aren't important. Let's just say he was pretty aggressive. I emailed the owner of the restaurant about what had happened and went to my shift the next day. Owner was outside the restaurant firing the manager, all on the word of a brand new employee he'd never even met. I was so impressed, and the rest of the mostly young female staff were very grateful for the change. That restaurant was a great place to work. 2 years later, I started my first day at my dream restaurant, did some training, sat down for pre-shift with the kitchen and who comes out to present the specials. It's Leo, of course. He sees me and freezes up. After pre-shift, he tried to talk to me about working together, but I went straight to my new manager and say I have history with a current employee that they need to know about. I tell my story, I show the emails between the owner and myself. They talk to Leo about it. He is fired again. We worked in a really specialized food style where chefs circulate through all the restaurants. He later applied to work for me when I was the hiring manager and didn't get a call back, obviously. I'm out of the industry now, but I used to dream of getting him fired again. I want to haunt him the rest of his professional life. Story 23. Was the head chef of a small restaurant that I eventually owned before my life collapsed, but that's another story. The owner, who was rarely there, suspected the general manager of stealing. On quiet nights, if she thought she wasn't asking enough on tips, place was small enough that on slow nights it was just the two of us working, she would go eye to the computer from the manager's screen and delete any tables that were paid in cash, pocketing the money. I got suspicious when my food cost numbers would just never add up to what was being sold. So I got a hold of the software CompAY, then ran out computer system, and it turns out they have a backdoor that even the management can't see that logs every single keystroke. Turns out she had ripped off close to $20,000 over a 6-month period. She was asked to leave after that, but for some reason, the owner didn't bother to press charges. Story 24. She was hired as a new director. Didn't know much of anything about what she claimed she did. The straw that broke the camel's back was when she stated her boss would sign anything she put in front of him because he didn't know what it was. Oops! Story 25. My mother got this done. She worked for a starting company, and her boss really needed her help because the boss wanted my father to invest. He owns a couple of companies. My mother would get a job as a second-rank CEO. Right under the women, she got fired. In fact, the boss kept treating her like crap, so she told my father. My father told the other investors, and all 3 of them canceled the deal. They set up the same kind of company with my mom as only CEO. All people who worked for that former boss left and began working at the new company. Story 26. Not fired, but moved stores and demoted. He posted publicly on his Facebook asking why so many of his staff have mental problems. He also posted a few weeks before that he was having a cheeky snow day and skipping work. I reported it myself. Considering I had been on a final written warning for breaking the social media policy, I don't see why he shouldn't be either. Story 27. Didn't get my boss fired because he was the owner, But I did screw him out of a high-dollar contract. A little background here, this guy was a complete a-hole. He treated his customers like crap, so you can imagine how he treated his employees. This was a hydraulic repair shop. We rebuilt hydraulic cylinders, pumps, and custom-made parts, etc. I was a truck driver for this guy, and the only one in the shop licensed to drive this truck. The owner wasn't even licensed. Eventually, I got so sick of this a-hole and made up my mind to quit. But I waited for the opportune moment to do so. My former boss was in talks with a steel company for a contract to do all their hydraulic repairs. A contract that would have landed him millions over a period of 10 years. Keep in mind, this guy was the royal definition of banana head. My last day had to make an emergency delivery to said steel mill, and the contract hinged on this delivery. I load up the truck, then went back in, clocked out, and went home. My former boss called guiding why I wasn't there. I told him I'm tired of being treated like a damn abused dog and slave, and that I quit, and told him good luck trying to get a CDL driver within the next hour, and to duck off I quit. Well, he changes his tune real quick, because now he was at my mercy and he didn't want to lose this big contract. He must have been desperate, because he offered a raise, which coming from this guy who never gives raises, must meant he was in a panic. About a week later, I ran into a former coworker from said hydraulic shop who had quit a week later for the same reasons. This coworker told me the former, a whole boss, freaked out the whole day the day I quit, and that he lost the big contract. The former coworker also stated that 2 more guys quit within that week, and the former boss couldn't figure out why no one would stay. The former coworker and I laughed and joked, and us both thought that the former boss will never figure out no one would want to work for such a complete a-hole. Story 28. Boss was running several schemes and got caught when his own boss was replaced. I worked in a restaurant where I was originally hired on as a supervisor. I noticed right from the beginning that our manager was a bit of a sleazebag, because from my first day, he told me that he expects all of his girls come to work done up and looking good. If that wasn't enough to put me off of him, I soon noticed all of the women in the restaurant called him Papi and would frequently give him shoulder massages when speaking with him. Despite being the GM, the man was very unpredictable when it came to showing up for work. He'd come in for a total of 4 hours during the week. It didn't matter what he had on the schedule he sent to his boss. He put himself on for every day, except Sundays. He was impossible to nail down. My first night closing, he was supposed to train me and left me to do all of the procedures by myself. I had experience in a smaller setting that landed me to being a fast learner. I also noticed he was giving away a lot of rewards to certain staff, gift cards, buying food, bringing in coffee, and always took money from the till to do so. I knew we had a discretionary fund from corporate that managers could spend on staff, but I never saw him take money from that. Never even saw that money actually, despite the fact that I was a part of management and technically could use it on my shift to reward my staff. At one point, he told us he would be covering another GM's vacation at a location 30 miles away and would be there all week. We got a call on the 3rd day of him covering from said location's GM, asking where our boss was, as he was late to relieve them. Turns out our GM was only scheduled at the other location for 2 days. In the manager's last month, we received a new district manager who was much more hands-on than our previous one, and most importantly, wasn't buddy with our manager. The district manager noticed very quickly it was very hard to keep track of our manager. Manager had no clue what time his staff was starting in the morning or what we were doing in our shifts. The breaking point actually came on my birthday. Our GM was scheduled, but not in the store. He instructed me to send 2 of our line chefs home even before lunch hit, as he wanted to cut labor. Someone very high in the company decided to drop by our location and saw that we were slammed with not enough staff. Cut to a week later, where the district manager shows up right as our manager is leaving on an errand. GM looks a bit nervous but leaves anyways. The district manager pulls me aside and asks me what the hell is going on in the restaurant. They knew about the fiasco that was the previous week's lunch service, which had me in the kitchen with one chef. Now, I had recently been told that I was being promoted to the assistant manager as our old one left, due to the behavior of our GM. I revealed that the GM informed me I would be working 80 hours a week while he worked 20, and that I would be required to pay him 40% of the tips I received in my paycheck. I was to give him cash every payday so he could have his cut. To me, it wasn't a surprise that GM was not there for a scheduled shift. I told the district manager everything I've said here, and they were speechless. Within half an hour of the GM returning from errands, he was escorted out of the building, and our staff were told he was to never come back. More crazy developments unfolded in the aftermath, but basically due to my honesty and unwillingness to be taken advantage of, someone lost their job that day. Story 29. I worked in a bar, and I caught my supervisor giving her and her friends free drinks and taking bottles home. They reviewed the CCTV and found she was also dealing substances from behind the bar, and she was fired the next day. Story 30. I quit. I went through everything in my exit interview. How my reviews were always crap, so she didn't have to give me a raise, but that I had emails telling me how great that same work was throughout the year, and how I was written up. because someone heard me say something mean. She couldn't tell me what it was because she wouldn't repeat it. HR never heard anything about it. She also did that right up by herself, instead of with another member of management per the company handbook. She also told me to work 80 hours a week just because she wanted me to order that I should find a new job. I refused to, and then I got a new job within the week's end turned in my 2 weeks. I also talked about how she threatened my job because I found out about her and a few other people changing reports to get them all of their bonuses. I got to meet with everyone about the crap she was pulling, except for the people that were in on the editing of reports. I met with the COO, CFO, VP of HR, and all of the legal team. After I left, she was immediately moved to a new department and then let go within 3 months. Also, the people that were changing reports were either let go or demoted. I do feel bad for leaving that job, though. Within the year, that department was fully let go. So my friends all lost their jobs. Story 31, hotel manager. My hotel was undergoing a full renovation. During this time, both my managers were putting in less than 30 hours a week, and I was racking up 70 doing their jobs as well. I'm ambitious and knew it would look great on my resume, so was happy to bust my ass. 2 months in, I started to notice things going missing like furniture. Funds allocated by corporate to offset lore were not used, and just general bullcrapery. Found out both my managers were pocketing the $20,000 in discretionary funds allocated to us when I overheard a conversation in the back office. Reported them to corporate and an investigation was launched. 2 days later on a Friday, I had been put on suspension for misconduct by our district manager, and Monday 9 a.m., I was told to clean out my office. I was burnt out at this point, so took it as a victory. Filed a retaliation lawsuit. District manager conducts the investigation with corporate and moved states. 6 months later, everyone is getting fired. Charged have been pressed on 2 managers. I'm back here eating popcorn, sad that I was great at my job, but can never work for that company again. Story 32. I had been working in retail for 5 years when upper management decided that all managers needed to switch departments so they can learn all departments. I was a low-end manager, so I didn't have to switch, but my boss did. So I ended up with one of the favorite managers in store and thought, how cool. Yeah, so she had a lot of trouble adapting to our department, so I picked up a lot of her slack because we are a team. That's how it should go when you have someone in training. So because I had been doing the work for 4 years in the department, I was much faster and efficient than she was. And instead of being happy with the help, she got resentful. Suddenly, nothing I did was correct. I was always in trouble, and always getting written up for things for the smallest errors. One day I noticed that a lot of my own department supplies were destroyed before I was allowed to destroy them. I had to hold on to them for 6 months before I could do the write-offs. When I asked around as to what happened, I was told my boss threw everything away in the compactor without doing the correct steps, which meant that my inventory was going to be way off. I was livid. I confronted her about it and she denied it all. During this time, I was taking some leadership classes, which happened to also have my boss's boss in them. So we got to know each other, and he quickly realized my boss was lying about me. So we made a deal to catch her in the act because his boss was on my manager's side and not his. So one day, I find some supplies in my supply closet that weren't supposed to be there. I'd spoken to my boss's confused yet, and she denied my request. But here they were with her signature on them. So I walked up and asked her if she changed her mind, and she said no. So they pulled the camera, and sure enough, my boss, who was keen on getting me fired, was the one who took the supplies off the floor and put them in my supply closet. Later that day, my boss went to her boss's boss, the one that declined my supplies, saying that I signed her signature on said supplies. Later that day, I was doing my boss's job again because I was told to, and I hear her getting paged to the office. She was fired over it. Everyone blamed me for her losing her job because she was the favorite manager. I was told I a horrible person and lied. She would hunt me down on Facebook randomly over the next 5 years just to cuss me out. One time, she came into my new job, realized I worked there, and tried to say I stole money from her. Thankfully, the second she left, I ran right into the office and explained who she was and what she was doing. I haven't seen her in the past 5 or so years. I hope she changed her ways, but it's doubtful. Story 33. Foreman lied and said I was 30 minutes late for 2 weeks straight when in reality he told not to clock in until he returns from getting supplies with his buddy. I prove it and he loses his spot. Ooh, finally I have a story. Okay, so I worked for a really especially old school type of construction company. And roofing companies are already about as old school, machismo, anti-safety, pro-efficiency, zero progress as could possibly be. Which is why roofing is the #4 deadliest and dangerous job based on fatalities per year. They love to oppress and pick favorites. Well, I came into a company straight out of prison being 23 with little experience, and my only positive traits were extremely hard worker. Always do what I'm told, and I'm 6 feet 4 inches or 295 pounds, mostly just muscle. There's not much else to do in prison, but work out. Plus our company had a chemical patent that made it impossible to unionize and forced us to do as told. No matter what, or lose our spot. I wasn't going to lose my spot making $56 an hour as making over $130,000 a year. Here was my only shot at doing so. Well, my boss and his son, as he called him, would basically torment me any way they could. And if I didn't play the defenseless idiot role, they'd get you kicked off the prevailing wage crew, and I'd be making $18 an hour. One day I couldn't take it anymore, and I snapped and yelled back at him. That solidified his intentions to get me kicked off. I was toast in my mind, but the two highest positions in the company basically treated me like their sons. All coworkers said it because I'm white and must be a snitch, as I was the only one not embezzling stolen materials and abusing the company gas cards, selling gas and filling up private tanks and vehicles. Anyways, soon I noticed we'd all show up at 5:45, and at 6 a.m. clock and foreman would tell me and the union guy to stay here as they needed to go to Home Depot and get something every day for 2 weeks, and would make me clock in at 6:30 or later when they got back. I said okay, and took a few pics of the worksite as it was genuinely awesome. Well, finally, 2 weeks later, I get a call from one of the two dudes who gave me special treatment. He yelled at me, saying I've been 30 minutes late every damn day for 2 weeks, and my foreman has been reporting it every day for 2 weeks. Says he's sorry, but he has to kick me off the crew and send me to crafty, normal, pay 2 hours away job site crew from now on. I said, oh, well, that's interesting because I've been here every day at 5:45 a.m. and have been told not to clock in due to the reasons above. He asked for proof. I showed him the pictures and dates, and third-party union buddy backed me up, as well as cameras on the government property entrance to the job site. Foreman, who worked there for 29 years, got suspended and then kicked off prevailing wage crew along with his butt buddy's son and didn't work another PW job for the 2 years I worked there. He took my place at the crap job, which was 3 hours from his house in LA. I then was kept on every job prevailing wage for the next 3 years and maybe spent a total of 3 to 4 months normal wage max over that entire time. The rest was $56 an hour wage. Cherry picked on any crew going on the next big pay job I'd magically be sent to. Story 34. I was working at a large, negatively viewed retailer at the time as an assistant manager. We worked single coverage generally, and I was supposed to work no more than 35 hours. My manager was hourly as well and was at 44 max. He was working roughly 15, but punching for 48. Came in the mornings even if I was scheduled, took in shipment but didn't process it, then sat in the back, took the company tablet home with him to take conference calls at home. Took me out of view of the cameras and fake punched me and called me a little git for asking him to approve my vacation and work his scheduled hours. Overall stand-up guy. I complained to my district manager, who told me I must have misread the scenario. I told her I was uncomfortable at work and felt unsafe working with him. She said, you need to resolve it between you two, that she's never had any problems with him before. He was hired 3 months prior. I had been with the company for 4 years, so that statement meant nothing. So after considering things, I took my complaint to HR after getting off the phone with our HR rep who told me nearly similar things, that we could have a joint mediation call to try and resolve it. I got a phone call from Dumb again asking how I could go over her head like that it was disrespectful and insubordination. I left the day before Thanksgiving with no notice. For a specialty retailer, that's a huge blow. I prepped nothing for Black Friday. The entire back room was packed to the ceiling with unprocessed shipment boxes. It was bad. I found out later that my manager was fired for stealing and time card fraud shortly thereafter. The regional manager found out when he had to come in to help the store. Then shortly after that, the district manager was fired for withholding bonus hours for the stores in order to get her bonus for unused hours. And the HR rep for the area was fired the same day for not advocating for employees. And taking the district manager's side, who turns out was her childhood friend, I was actually rehired by the same company because they put my termination in incorrectly 4 months later. Those that were still there welcomed me back with open arms, and I got promoted to manager 2 months after that. So glad to be out of that hellhole company, though. Story 35. I had a boss who was skimming off employee hours at Walmart. I took screenshots of my employees' hours on Thursday before the shift started and then screenshots of their hours on Friday that showed that all of them had a couple hours skimmed off their work week. I was a low-level manager. He was an upper-tier manager. He got fired. I believe his motivations was that he wanted to get promoted and wanted to show that he could get more done in less man-hours. Probably would have impacted his bonus too. Story 36. It wasn't just me. It was a team effort. At my old job, we got a new food and beverage director, so he was in charge of our restaurant, bar, as well as our conference area. He couldn't care less for the conference area, so he focused his time on the restaurant. Got rid of bussers and made every server become their own bartender. Made a new drink menu and worked with the head chef for a new food menu. Fired the people he didn't like and hired his drinking buddies from old jobs to be servers there. He was an alcoholic, and he would always disappear into his office with a cocktail or a glass of wine and leave us servers out to struggle. I remember one shift in particular. I was scheduled to work lunch and dinner, and I was the only one scheduled during lunch. We were showing the local college football game in our college town, and it just so happened to be our rivals we played that day. Every table was full, every bar stool. I even had people standing and just ordering beer from me. My chefs were running my food for me. He comes out from his office to see how things are going. I'm eyeballs deep making drinks and had just finished one of our special drinks. It was the colors of the team, and he complimented me on how well I was doing. I turn around and he's gone. My drink is gone. Didn't see him again until he complained about his table in the restaurant, my middle school principal and her mom, and asked me to take that table. After a few months, everyone hated him, including his friends he had brought over with him. On New Year's Eve, we would have a huge party and everyone was expected to work. Even his boss was there. Halfway through the night, he said he had to go home because his wife and daughter were sick, but he had told his friends he was going to a concert right across the street. So we told his boss, went out to our wrap-around patio, and sure enough, you could see him with his wife waiting to go in. He didn't return to work, story 37. So she wasn't my boss, but someone working for a branched-off part of the company. We worked in rentals, she worked on the tech side in sales. I'm going to try to keep this vague because the company is honestly one of the best places I've ever worked. She was flying out to my location and wanted an upgrade on the car she was renting. Employees get 50% off discounts, so the policy is no upgraded cars unless we're sitting on a lot of them. At the time of booking, we had enough, so I said it was fine. She wasn't even communicating with me through this. She had 2 other men in our company coordinating with me. That was weird, but whatever. Long story short, she shows up so late without texting any of us that the system automatically canceled her reservation. By the time she finally showed up, the car type she wanted was booked. She lost her crap. She's cussing and yelling at my team, storms into our tiny office and says she's taking this crap over until we get it sorted, just being all around demanding. I told her we couldn't get her into the car and gave her every single reason. And she just kept freaking out on me. It took everything in me not to yell back, but I'm trying to set a good example for my team, who were all the fighting type. Eventually, she gets in another car, slams one of her doors into the car next to her, brand new $50,000 car, and drives off without letting us start her reservation. I instantly called my boss, the VPO, and HR. They took this crap so seriously it was amazing. By the time she got back from vacation, her job was gone. Then when I went to HR a few months later, I was jokingly referred to as the girl who got that girl fired. The craziest part is that she used to hold the same position as me, just in a different city. She knew what we could and couldn't do. She has dealt with insanely rude people, and she knows how seriously that company takes any kind of complaint. Like, did she think none of us were going to do anything about it? Story 38. I got the second in command fired. She would talk big crap to anyone in my section of the business. She claimed to know how to run the area. She didn't. All right, story time! She wanted me to prep for the 6 o'clock rush. It was 2:30 in the afternoon. I told her I would get to it as I was stalking the back room while we had some quiet. At about 4, she started harassing me to prep for the rush, and since she had been bullying my coworker to put her till away, I snipped at her that I would get it done in 10 minutes. A mistake, since it takes 7 minutes to prep the gravy and cheese, among other things, when we only have 2 microwaves. Needless to say, it took longer than 10 minutes. Lo and behold, the winner has come to gloat. Not only that, she decided to check the temperature of this stuff. Fine, it's still heating up and all. She yelled at me that it was all too cold and promptly threw it out. I nearly snapped. I can't imagine that punching a 4'10" person would look very good on my resume. I went to the large storage room to cool down for a bit. I come back to find out that the Git put plastic back in the steam table, where we're only supposed to put metal containers. Since, plastic melts, I swiftly remove it and dump the gravy into a metal container, putting the plastic into the sink. I move to the front to find her yelling at my coworker for using my till. I move forward and ask what the issue is. I told her she could use my till, since she had been ordered to pack her till up for the day. She yelled at me again. I was practically vibrating. Another manager noticed and pulled me away for a bit, bringing me upstairs where the customers can't go. I promptly burst into tears. After probably half an hour of blurry cleaning, I had sobered up enough to return to my area. A shift change had happened while I was gone, so I had a different coworker this time. I find out from this coworker that in the half hour I was gone, she had put plastic into the steam table again. I can't imagine that replacing the steam table would be too cheap. She'd also been harassing this coworker as well. So here we are, nearing the end of my shift. It's about 5:30, and it's starting to get busy. We're not ready because dumb crap threw all of our stuff out. I sigh and hand in my 2 weeks on my next shift. I hear from my coworkers later on that she had been fired, mostly because of the evidence that I had given the manager that brought me upstairs. HR had a blast with that one. Story 39. My boss got fired on their own decisions. I just happened to be there. I worked at a substances tour in the US in the early 2000s, and controlled substances were going missing from the pharmacy. My district management team called me in and asked if I had any idea who was taking the pills. I did not. I realized much later that asking the assistant manager this instead of the manager should have tipped me off immediately that the manager was the suspect. The next night, I closed the store, and loss prevention installed extra cameras in the store and pharmacy. I was the only store employee who knew about these cameras, and I went in early or stayed late every day to change the tapes. It wasn't great, no real days off. Shortly after, the manager went on leave for family medical reasons, and the pill counts were no longer off. It seemed pretty obvious at that point, but 2 pharmacy techs were also out at that time, so the investigation continued. The manager came back from their leave, and they were caught on camera entering the store early, entering the pharmacy without a pharmacist present. Illegal, then unlocking the controlled substances cabinet. The video did not actually show the manager taking the pills, but the pill count was off from the day before. Again, seemed obvious. The manager was called into the district office the day I delivered the tapes to the district loss prevention team. The manager was suspended pending a formal investigation, then subsequently fired. They were told not to have contact with any employees, but took it upon themselves to call the store and 1. Try to frame one of the pharmacy techs, and 2. Tell the employees not to believe everything I said. Note, I said nothing through the entire ordeal. So in the sense that I managed the day-to-day of changing videotapes on secret cameras, I got my boss fired. Here's hoping they are dealing with their painkiller addiction and no longer making bad decisions. Story 40. To clarify, my boss, one of 2 I had, was effectively fired by the client, not necessarily the company, although he did leave soon after. I was managing a project with a client who tended to change directions a lot, but they paid exceedingly well and were pretty pleasant to deal with on my end. My boss didn't like that the client and I got along well and decided to undermine me at every turn with the people under me and then with the client. I was working off his direct orders, which I made sure to get in writing for myself and the client, but he didn't care about contradicting himself. He just wanted to be idiot. The client was starting to deal more and more exclusively with just me because they didn't like my direct boss's attitude and his contradictory instructions, as it was slowing everything way down. I was now reaching out to my second boss for all questions and guidance because I couldn't get anywhere with Boss 1, and he was now ignoring my communications. Apparently, Boss 1 got into a bad mood or drunk one night, and I woke up to an email from him to the client with me CC'd on it, cussing the client out and even going so far as to say nasty things about the client's spouse. As I'm working on an email to Boss 2 about all this, the client emails me directly to tell me they know this was just him. Don't be worried about what they're going to do next. My team and I are safe. Soon after, they send an email to both my bosses and me stating that they are no longer working with Boss 1. He is fired from their project effective immediately, and they'll be working directly with me and Boss 2 from here on out. Boss 1 tried to act up with me, and I ignored it because damn that guy. Come to find out that before I started there, he'd actually cost our company several clients and even got the company evicted from 2 different offices after his horrific dealings with clients and landlords alike. That must have been the last straw because soon after, Boss 1 parted ways with our company, went on to make his own company, and still has a hard time getting or keeping clients because of his notoriously crafty and egotistical attitude. Crap leopards don't change their crap spots.